analytical presentation on Starbucks. The reasons for this is that there was a recent instance of racial discrimination in one of their stores, and this is not only a major issue for the company, but it's happening all over the country and all over the world, and so it's really important to talk about, but also there was a really major impact on the company's reputation as well as their profits. And there were corporate efforts to kind of reverse that, or at least try to, but we have some recommendations to kind of better that. So to start, I am going to introduce the brand, even though we all know what Starbucks is, and then their mission and the dilemma as well as the impacts of the dilemma, and then Julie is going to take over and talk about the corrective actions of the company, as well as the findings that we got from our research and our ultimate recommendations for the company to take. So Starbucks is a worldwide coffee house brand, and they have since diversified into grocery store products as well as luxury espresso bars in Paris and Milan. They started in 1971 in Seattle, Washington, and they have since grown significantly. They now have 28,000 plus locations worldwide, 238,000 employees, $22.4 billion in revenue last year. And Kevin Johnson, the CEO, has made some really major efforts to position the company as a progressive and socially responsible company. And with that, their mission statement really places an emphasis on the people in the community and not just their customers by saying to inspire and nurture the human spirit, one person, one cup, and one neighborhood at a time. So to really back their mission statement, they also have some really major social impact efforts that show the company going above and beyond what it needs to do just to make sales. And this really highlights their efforts toward their employees, the community, the environment, minorities. There's all these efforts that really showcase the company doing more than it needs to place it as a progressive brand. So this includes college plans for students that work with them, refugee hiring, military commitments, ethical sourcing of their products, and climate change efforts, food share, and diversity, inclusion efforts, which we will get much more into a little bit later. One thing I thought was really important to highlight was a proactive initiative that they took in 2015 called the Race Together campaign, and this was in response to some racial tensions that were happening in the country at that time, with some racially motivated shootings and protests. And this was really just to bring race and social justice into conversation. And while the campaign wasn't that successful, and it was kind of weird for your barista to be talking to you about these kind of things, it more than anything just kind of set a trend to be more proactive about issues rather than reacting to things after they happen for major brands with major influence. And with that, unfortunately, it contrasts to this campaign. There was a major issue that happened earlier this year on April 14th, where two gentlemen who were waiting at a Starbucks location in Philadelphia were arrested because they hadn't bought anything yet, but they were really just waiting for a meeting with someone who turned out to be like a major real estate investor. But the manager still had these men arrested, and they were held for nearly 9 hours that day, even though they were completely innocent. They weren't doing anything wrong. And I think this issue really highlights that there's still racial insensitivity, and it really shows that there's a lack of diversity training. So even though this brand has made all these efforts to make them seem socially responsible and look to be as progressive as they tried to be, if there's not practices and efforts in place to train your people on diversity and how important it is, then the company was still held liable, and that's exactly what happened. So the impacts of this issue that happened were they were charged with discriminatory conduct charges, as well as there was social action all over the place to boycott Starbucks. So people were taking videos of themselves pouring out their coffee and actively protesting with signs outside of their stores. But there was also a $30 million loss in missed sales. So it was a major issue. But Julia is going to talk more about the brand's corrective actions and our recommendations.
talking about their first course of corrective action, which was directly after the incident that took place in April. So according to USA Today, it was estimated that they lost about $12 million of sales by closing every shop down nationwide for that Tuesday afternoon. And the employees were required to do mandatory racial bias training. And this training session consisted of the employees getting into groups of 3 and 5 by their choice, and they were instructed to participate in sensitive conversations. And these were all instructed through a customizable workbook where they would have prompts and like stimulating questions and stuff like that for people to fill in their answers and what they got from the videos in the sessions. They also watched videos, like instructional videos of how to interact with customers, and these included Starbucks executives, as well as Common, which is a well-known activist and musician. They also hired a famous documentary filmmaker to make a 7-minute film, and their whole thing was that they wanted to make it relevant and current and important, and so they included clips like the Asian man who was dragged down the aisle on the airplane, like on the United airplane, everything like that, to really get in on like the sensitive topics that they need to face and acknowledge. After that, they were brought back into the group as a whole, and they were instructed to reflect on what they defined as racial bias and kind of dissecting how they can find ways to provide a better service to their customers, because from this point on, they just need to move forward from what happened. This program was developed by over 30 experts, and these experts specialize in things that range from neuroscience, community outreach, diversity, things like that. And so Starbucks is really trying to put their best foot forward, trying to figure out what they can do to fix the problem going forward. So next, I'm going to be talking about what we concluded from that first course of action. So what we realized is that actually a lot of these things took place in schools. Racial bias training is what I'm talking about. And I think that's relevant just because racial discrimination can really take place anywhere, the workplace, out in public, schools, Starbucks, anywhere. And so I think information with studies that took place in schools are relevant to this. But there is a nonprofit called Initiate Equity, and they specialize in holding racial bias training across the nation. And Jennifer Moore, who is a speaker for this nonprofit, explains how a lot of the calls that she gets are reactive, not proactive, and that's a huge issue with this. It's how can we reconstruct things to prevent from incidents like this happening in the first place. And this is like the challenges with timing, because a company's feeling of urgency is apparent, but also the due diligence that's required to do something meaningful takes time. Like kind of the same way that when you build a muscle, you do like repetition and you repeat the same exercises. You can't just like, it's not a quick fix solution. And then also, we also were focused in on how the employees reacted to the training. And so the article that I read from Time Magazine did state that they would put the name of the employee and as well as their ethnicity, and they would explain their opinion of the workshop. And I found that a lot of the minorities, a lot of the employees who were minorities did not find the workshop as efficient. There were quotes like, they really missed the mark, lots of talking, wanted more discussion, more hands-on. They were told verbatim to be color-brave, not color-blind. And so, and then also on the other hand though, a white male who works at the Arkansas location said that he wouldn't change one thing about the program and that he really learned a lot about racial bias. And then, and I also want to talk about the whole idea of implicit bias. And when I say implicit bias or unconscious bias, that is mainly pertaining to the idea that our human minds are conditioned by cultural exposure to stereotype people. And it's kind of a discussion of whether or not that's a justification for racism, and that's a problem because calling it implicit bias kind of normalizes prejudice, and it's the type of thing where if other people are doing it, then it's normal and it's okay. And so people like Betsy Levy-Pollock, which is a Princeton psychologist, she was saying that, yes, we all do have minds that do stereotype people, but it's up to us to fix those habits. Having good intentions just isn't enough. So just because, like that whole, like, I'm not racist type thing. And then also I want to talk about the UCC study that took place at the University of California. and it was just where math teachers were from 5 different middle schools were asked to read about like why students tend to misbehave, and then write out how they can employ like how to respect children so that they can get better results. And then immediately after, the suspension rates for minority groups, which are typically really high, plummeted completely from 16% to 6%. So it's speculated that maybe that these kids were facing bias beforehand, unknowingly. Okay. And so another course of corrective action was after the workshop, the executive chairman for Starbucks spoke publicly about just kind of checking in, and instead of making it seem like this was like a one-time solution, it was the start and like the first step of Starbucks towards conducting long-term efforts towards being an anti-bias company. They also made the instructional videos that were provided to the employees online, and I feel like that's more holding the company accountable, being transparent, and trying to really show that they're trying to make an effort towards being better. They also worked with organizations like the NAACP, Legal Defense and Education Fund, and I think this like really helps with their credibility, and it's like I feel like they're taking it seriously. They also changed different things about their policy. Like right after the incident in April, they changed the policy to where you don't need to buy a product in the store in order to sit or go to the bathroom. And they also plan to globalize their efforts and incorporate it into onboarding for new employees. So like from this point forward in the future, like employees know exactly what's expected of them, what to do in certain situations and stuff like that. And then more findings from that. Another thing that we came up with is also just again being proactive, being responsive, and being empathetic, caring about like the customers itself, and the whole thing about making this long term and like for the long run. And also I learned a lot about DEI, which stands for diversity, equality, and inclusion, and this is something that typically a lot of schools are encouraged to operate in their schools to prevent discrimination, and I think this could work really well in a business because like it's essentially the same thing. You're dealing with lots of different people, lots of different backgrounds and everything like that. And so so I think it's all about being preventative and building from the ground up so that inequalities like this don't occur again. And I'm gonna also go over the recommendations that we came up with. So first, with this, we were talking more about like, can you walk the walk and talk the talk and stuff like that. So if you want to have an image of being progressive, then you should be hiring progressive employees that will promote that image, that share the same objective for the company and everything like that. We also want to ensure that the company changes by changing its structure because, for example, with this incident, it might have been prevented if there was a direct, like explicit procedure on how to handle that situation. Also, obviously hiring diverse, like promoting diversity within the company and in order to essentially open up the opportunity for people to express opinions from different mindsets, different perspectives, stuff like that. And also diverse training classes and shifts, again, to have like a more hands-on, like realistic experience with diversity. And we want to ensure that efficiency by like, it's all about the follow through. So making sure that this isn't just a Band-Aid, but like an actual pivotal change for the company. And again, being proactive, I think that's probably one of the most important things we're trying to say. It's like working ahead, like 2 steps ahead of the customer, like preventing from anything like this happening. And I'm going to pass it out to Lucy so she can conclude it.
So in conclusion, through all of our research and everything that we found for Starbucks, we learned that racism is not something that can be fixed in a one-time workshop. It really needs to be an ongoing effort with anti-bias. To be more effective, it has to be long-term. It can't just be a 1 4-hour session. Diversity is also vital to combat these issues. So if you have executives that are all white and all male, you're not going to have these values and perspectives that are really necessary in order to operate in a way that reflects the diversity in these measures that we're trying to combat. And again, those proactive measures are really way more important than the reactive ones, which are just a Band-Aid. Not only is it better just influentially as a company, but it's for like cost-wise and timing and effectiveness, it's really important to be 2 steps ahead. So, do you have any questions?
So I think you guys did a